This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, from Philadelphia to Erie and from Scranton to Pittsburgh, it's Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenewalt, Senior Fellow of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and I'm joined as usual by my colleague, Maura Donnelly. Maura, welcome to the show.
Hello, Charlie. How are you?
I don't know. I thought I was relieved. I thought the presidential election was over, and the Pennsylvania general election was over, but it appears that maybe it's not.
No, we just cannot be that lucky, Charlie.
Well, think of those people in Georgia, how they're going to have two Senate runoff elections yet. And this will go on for another 2 months in Georgia. There won't be any regular TV down there, Maura.
No. Those poor people.
Well, we have the state's best expert with us today to talk about the presidential election and the Pennsylvania presidential election, and that's Brad Bumsted. Brad, welcome back to the program. You are the bureau chief of the caucus. Could you please tell our viewers again what the caucus is? And blow your horn for the caucus?
Sure. Thanks for having me. We'll do that. Thanks for having me on. And the caucus is a watchdog publication affiliated with LNP Media Group, which is the newspaper in Lancaster. And I'm an investigative reporter as well as the bureau chief. And we just do a lot of things to try to hold government accountable, whether that's in the legislature, the governor's branch, and we're nonpartisan. We don't care whether they're Democrats or Republicans. We're just looking for things that just aren't right and to let people know about that.
And having followed your work for over 2.5 decades, I can attest to the fact that you are a old-fashioned reporter, and it doesn't matter if they're R's or D's. You do hold people accountable, and the Commonwealth is better off for your service. We thank you. Maura, I'm going to throw the first...
Fashion reporter means older?
I think it means middle of the road. I'm going to throw the first question over to you, Maura.
So, we're going to talk in this segment a lot about the presidential race, both on the national level and here in Pennsylvania. So, why don't we start with the big picture? We have Biden giving acceptance speeches and setting up transition teams and speaking with foreign officials, all sorts of activity going on. Oh, setting up a COVID task force. But then we've got the other side saying like, whoa, the race hasn't been called yet. Tell us what your perspective on the whole scenario is at this point.
Right. It's the appeals and legal actions that Trump has gone. Any one of those could potentially, if a broader interpretation were taken, perhaps negate the vote in Pennsylvania in the worst case scenario. But even if that happened, it wouldn't necessarily change the overall results unless another state were taken up, whether that would be Nevada or Arizona. So it's not clear that even if you win those for Pennsylvania, that other states would go out too. But on one hand, if you want to take Trump's point of view on this, why should he be doing transition, given important, maybe even top secret documents to Biden when he believes he can still win? I personally believe it's a stretch. I think a lot of Republicans I've talked to do as well.
I have to go back, Brad, to a transition between Herbert Hoover and Franklin Delano Roosevelt to think of another transition that was as bumpy as this appears that it's going to be. Can you think about others?
Not offhand. That definitely comes to mind, but I'm not sure about Abraham Lincoln's ascendancy to the presidency and what that might have been like. He was either loved or hated by a lot of people at the time, so I'm not sure. But transition is really important, and the Biden people believe they've won, and they think they should get what they need to come in and take over government. I understand that. This is just really almost as unprecedented as the year 2000 election with the hanging chads in Florida with George W. Bush, who did ultimately win that over Gore. And I remember thinking back in 2000, if Pennsylvania's voting process, particularly Philadelphia's, were ever scrutinized to the degree that Florida's were at that time, this would be an ugly, ugly mess for this state. I'm not suggesting there's proof of any widespread voter fraud, but it'd be difficult to just give Philadelphia and Pennsylvania a clean bill of health based on its history. Let's put it that way.
So it's probably, even if they find fraud, it's not going to overturn the numbers so far in Pennsylvania.
No.
Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I mean, it would have to be something that would be so severe and so, such an adverse effect on democracy and elections that the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, would have to overturn it just in the public interest. But it would have to be bad, not just 1,000 votes here, 1,000 votes there. I mean, something really nefarious. And the reason I'm not a huge believer in that is that I know the president believes this or contends this was a conspiracy among Democratic governors and urban areas with Democratic leaders and all of that. But if you look at the results nationwide, Trump lost the presidency, but Republicans kept the Senate, and the House remains still in Democratic hands. And down ballot, you have Republicans having a field day in Pennsylvania, even in other states. So it doesn't look like it. What did people who were trying to jimmy this race just go to president and not mess with the rest of them?
Well, that's the answer.
I guess it's the answer, but
the answer.
It would be a lot easier just to do this. When
you have to change or alter a ballot in a hurry, and you're just going for the big prize, and you leave the rest of it go, I suppose. It's interesting. Mara was talking about. I love the fact that on October 9th, Fred Stokes Jr. out of Nevada. He died 3 years ago, but he voted in the Nevada presidential election nonetheless, the age of 92. Even though he's been gone 3 years, he still managed to vote. And of course, there are many of other cases of that, and many in Pennsylvania. We have quite a few people who are from the 19th century who've risen up out of the grave to vote again. It's just like old times.
It is. It's between Chicago and Pennsylvania, I'm not sure which is worse, but Pennsylvania's had a long history of dead people signing petitions for candidates. But is it a contained, disease just with a couple thousand votes or something, which is awful, don't get me wrong, or is it something that's systemic?
So when Biden gave his day before his acceptance speech, he said that he basically got a mandate on the Democratic agenda and their issues. Based on what you've just said about the down ballot being far more Republican than the Democratic, do you think he's correct that he got a mandate with this election?
No, and I don't think that Trump would have either if he'd won by the same margin. It's not, a mandate tends to be associated with a landslide.
Right.
And this was a very close election. In fact, it was surprising to me that it was as close as it was. If these results hold, you have Trump losing by about the same margin that he defeated Hillary Clinton in 2016, 40-some thousand votes. And that's a really close race in a presidential contest.
Brad, what does this election tell us about the polls again? It appears that the polls were just as wrong in this election as they were in last election, and now there are some who think that the polls are being used for voter suppression. What's your view on that?
I don't know about voter suppression, but I do know, I believe, based on my own experiences, anecdotal experiences with friends, colleagues, and everything else, that Trump supporters don't want to talk to pollsters. They don't want to admit to pollsters that they supported Trump because there can be retribution. There can be criticism from people or whatever. So I think Trump underpolls, if you will, significantly. So when you look at those results, he's going to do a lot better than what that showed.
Do you think he'll go away?
Pardon me?
Do you think he'll go away?
Oh, sure. No.
Let's have a cool. Let's have a cool.
Yeah, I don't know what him sticking around actually means, but I have a feeling we've not heard the last of him.
I mean, at the very least, I think we're going to see a Trump TV channel that has his own politics on there and his people and him interviewing people, and it'll be a new addition. I can see that. I mean, and he'll remain active in the Republican Party. He'll have influence. I think it almost becomes the Trump followers and the whole Trump movement was almost like a third party in a sense. They were Republican, but you could have the Trump supporters and then a Republican Party that's just moderate. I don't think that's going to happen, but that's what it feels like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to ask you if you thought that he might move towards the development of a alternate news outlet, Brad. So I guess you'll be getting some feelers in the next few weeks from them if that comes to pass.
I think that's step one in his whole thing. But who knows? He may be planning his next race. Of course, then he'll be 78 in 4 years, which is how old Biden is now. So, people talk about Donald Jr. more likely as a candidate. I don't know about that, but I just have read a number of things that, could he run for governor in New York? There's even been talk behind the scenes about him running for governor or U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania. All based on speculation, but speculation fed by the fact that he hunts in Pennsylvania and spends a lot of his time in northeastern Pennsylvania. So we'll see.
Well, Brad, in the last minute, how did Pennsylvania turn out so differently than Ohio? We are demographically similar to Ohio in almost every category, with the exception of the city of Philadelphia. They have Cleveland and Cincinnati, but no Philadelphia. How can Ohio go for Trump in the numbers that they did, and Pennsylvania be so different than Ohio, where you think they would go hand in glove?
Well, because the population of the Philadelphia metropolitan area is bigger than any place in Ohio. And it goes well beyond Philadelphia's borders, and the suburbs were going heavily for Biden. So that gives you this enormous blue block in the southeast that has to be counterbalanced in the red areas, which, Trump did enormously well in some of these red areas, 10-1, 5-1, over Biden, but there were small numbers of votes. So
Brad, we've run out of time. I'm sorry. We've run out of time. We'll have you back for a second segment in a upcoming show here to talk some more about this with your permission.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay. Well, Bar and I will be right back with a second segment right after this.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, the largest, most influential municipal association in the Commonwealth. Since 1921, PSATS has been preserving and strengthening township government and securing greater visibility and involvement for townships in the state and federal political arenas. Covering 95% of Pennsylvania's land mass, townships represent 5.5 million residents, more than any other type of political subdivision in Pennsylvania. Behind the Headlines is also brought to you by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. The Pennsylvania Chamber serves as the frontline advocate for business on Pennsylvania's Capitol Hill by influencing the legislative, regulatory, and judicial branches of state government. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Hi, welcome back to Behind the Headlines. On this particular segment, Mara and I are joined by Jamie Martin, the president of APSCUF, which of course is the faculty union that serves our 14 state universities around the Commonwealth. And of course, we've been fortunate enough to have her and her predecessor Ken Mash, on our show many times to keep updates on higher education in Pennsylvania. And there's much to stay abreast of. Jamie, welcome to the show again.
Oh, thank you, Charlie. It's really a pleasure to be here with you and Mara today.
Well, it's wonderful, always wonderful to have you. There is so much going on in higher education, and I guess that will continue to be the case with a new national administration coming into place in Washington. But here in Pennsylvania, we have a lot to keep tabs on ourselves. Would you, perhaps the biggest issue affecting the state system and higher education in Pennsylvania, not only here but across the nation, is the issue of retrenchment. Could you please define for our viewers what retrenchment is?
Sure, absolutely. And just I have to say that on October 30th, that was maybe the most grim and difficult day I've had professionally in my entire career as an educator. So retrenchment is just another way of saying a person's going to lose their job. And it's not that they're losing their job because of any kind of professional issue, meaning they're not doing their job, or any kind of disciplinary issue. It just means that at the end of the academic year, they'll no longer have their career or their health care, and it's all happening amid a pandemic. So on October 30th, 113 of my colleagues at 5 of our universities, and these would be tenured and tenure-track colleagues, received letters of retrenchment notifying them that they would no longer be employed at the end of the academic year. And again, so distressing and somewhat callous, I think, doing this in the middle of a pandemic.
My thought originally when I read about this was that it was COVID related, but that's not actually the case, is it?
No. And I'm not saying that the COVID crisis has not had some impact, economic impact on the system, but truly, Mara, what's driving this is the Chancellor's directive to the university presidents to get their staffing levels back to the 2010-2011 student-faculty ratio. And that was a point in time when we had our highest enrollments in the state system, so somewhere around 119,000 students. What we've been told is that the trend in enrollment has been downward since then, and that's true. But what they don't say is that between 2000 and 2010, the enrollments increased pretty dramatically. And so to take us back to the time of the student-faculty ratios, and we're being told that's when we were most efficient, that was just when we were most overwhelmed and overcrowded in our classrooms. So the ratio, the need to get to that ratio is what's driving the retrenchments more so than anything, because the Chancellor announced this directive back in February, which was before we even really knew much about the pandemic, and accelerated the timeline in April with the mandate to reach those ratios in the next 2 years rather than in a 5-year timeline.
Well, Jamie, which one of the 14 state universities has exercised this right of retrenchment? Which ones are we considering here and examining?
Well, initially there were 10 universities. 3 of the universities rescinded letters, so then we were left with 7 that were facing the real possibility. We were happy that at California and Clarion universities, none of our tenured or tenure-track faculty received letters. The 5 where we had retrenchment letters issued included Lock Haven, where there were 2, Mansfield, where there were 3. There were 6 letters issued at Cheyney University, which was stunning to me because that represents 19% of their tenured or tenure-track faculty. And at the end of the academic year, if they move forward with their plans, they will have no library services available for those students on campus. At Edinburgh University, there were 21 letters issued, and again, they'll be discontinuing programs. And at my home University of Indiana, there were 81. And that's about 25% of the faculty. They're restructuring colleges there. They're discontinuing programs. One of the ones that I was most surprised about was they're discontinuing the journalism department at that university. You know, that department has produced 5 Pulitzer Prize winning journalists. And when we've met with the administration at these universities, they're not able to tell us what's going to happen to those students. How will they complete their degrees? Because we have, you know, a number of students that are in the pipeline, and they can't tell us how they're going to allow those students to actually complete the degrees and majors in which they chose. And there are some other programs there. So all of this is just, I mean, staggering when I'm thinking about the number of retrenchment letters that have been issued.
So, Jamie, what is APSCUF's plan? You represent these individuals who are being affected by retrenchments right now. What can be done?
Well, you know, it's important to recognize that getting a retrenchment letter is not the end of the process. It's the most devastating part of the process for colleagues, but we're going to continue to try to find alternatives to retrenchment, continue to try to find opportunities for them to perhaps move to another university where there are openings and where they are hiring. We will be continuing to, you know, to strategize at the state level, speaking with legislators and making sure people are aware of this, seeking additional funding, maybe through some of the money that's still there that came in through the CARES Act. And if necessary, we'll use the grievance process whenever universities aren't following the collective bargaining agreement as they move forward. So I can tell you that we're going to do everything we can. This has been keeping me up at night, thinking about what's happening across those 5 universities.
Oh, I'm a bit more traditional, Jamie. I don't understand how a facility can claim to be a university without library services. How is that even possible?
It's not. I mean, think about that. If you have a student who has an assignment that requires they seek out information, which is often, how do they go about doing that if there's not a library faculty member there to assist? You know, information literacy is so critically important, being able to gather information, being able to assess it on its merits. I'm not sure how that happens. And for this to occur at one of our nation's oldest HBCUs, and to put the students who chose to go to that university in a position where they're not going to have library services just is, again, mind-boggling. We did ask individuals at that university, the administration, what would happen. They don't know right now how they'll deal with this. They were talking about maybe having some collaboration with a university in the western part of the state, but I don't know how that works. I mean, when I was working through my master's and dissertation process, the reference librarian was my best friend. Right? They know how to access information. They know where the information is, and for a student to go through their undergraduate career and not have access to a library is just, I don't know how you have a university without that.
Well, in undergraduate school, I probably spent half of my time on campus at Millersville in the library, and in graduate school, it was probably 75 to 80% in the library, and I'm speechless. I don't know what to say to that. But Jamie, in a situation such as, would you repeat how many retrenchment letters were handed out at Indiana again, please?
81.
81. Now, how is it even possible? We know that student enrollment has declined, and that's been across the board, across the nation. How can Indiana have allowed itself to be in such a situation where they can claim that there's such an imbalance in faculty to students? It seems that seems to have been rash. It seems to have been, I don't know, it seems on its surface to be ill-considered.
It's a broken promise from my perspective. They'll talk about declining enrollments, and again, that's true, but at IUP, 24% of the faculty, we've already seen a decrease in 24% of the faculty since that time. So it's not true that we, have a glut of faculty. Part of what's driven the problems there have been rash decisions by past presidents and a current president. In the 2006 to 2010 timeframe, there was massive building of residence halls at a cost of $270 million. the building of a convention center at $54 million, and all kinds of choices like that that led to our housing costs being some of the highest in the state system. And then in 2016, our current president made the decision to go from a flat tuition model, where students paid the same amount for 12 credits or up to 18, to a per credit tuition model. So that meant that our tuition increased probably by around 20%. And so with those kinds of decisions, IUP has become the most expensive university of the 14. And I think that that's had a real impact on enrollments. That along with just, demographics. We have fewer students graduating from high school. So the decisions that were made by administrators that the faculty were often in an uproar about, crying out that these are bad decisions, were made anyways. And now we're being told that we have too many faculty. And so that's how we've gotten to that point.
I understand that retrenchments isn't really the only issue you're grappling with right now. You've got integrations going on. Would you tell us a little bit about what that means and what the challenge is there?
Sure, and this is also like kind of a lengthy process that we're facing at this point. Earlier in the calendar year, probably in the spring, Act 50 was passed, and that permits for the chancellor to begin a process of integration or their collaborations in various things. The plan that he announced at the last Board of Governors meeting was to begin exploring integrations of 3 universities in the West, which would be California, Clarion, and Edinburgh, and then 3 universities in what they're calling the Northeast, but it would be Bloomsburg, Mansfield, and Lock Haven. And so as we're moving forward, there are more questions than answers at this point. So questions like, what about athletics? Are there going to just be athletics at one university? Will they maintain those at all? Will they maintain their identity? Will they maintain their mascots? Will they maintain all of the programs? Like, what's going to happen? As I said, there are a lot more questions than answers, but we're watching that carefully as well as that moves forward, and the planning process is ongoing at this point, and the chancellor has announced that he would present that plan at the April Board of Governors meeting.
Well, Jamie, since there are so many more questions and answers, could we ask you to come back for another segment in a future show?
Absolutely, that'd be great.
Okay, well, Maura and I would love to have you back. So why don't we say goodbye for the present time and wrap up this show, but we'll have you back in the very near future. And we want to definitely keep our pulse on higher education in Pennsylvania. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Maura and I are wishing everyone a good weekend, and we'll see you next week. We'll see you then.